Bill, you got it? All right, we can get started. Miss Ruth is here. All right, so let's read Revelation chapter 9, and let's do verses 3 to 10.
Are you dreaming?
And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and upon them was given power, and as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God on their forehead. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was torment of a scorpion, when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it. They shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as teeth of lions. And they had the breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running into battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and they were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months.
You know, that's a pretty radical description of what's taking place here in the fifth trumpet. Notice that locusts can represent men in the Bible. Look at Jeremiah chapter 51.
Those scorpions kind of sound like tanks.
It kind of sounds like that, doesn't it? But we're going to look at something about scorpions and tails here in a few minutes, okay? We're going to try to let the Bible interpret itself. The reason why I wanted to cover all these verses, I want you to see that this is symbolic. If you notice what you read in verse 7, their faces were like the faces of men. We're not talking about real locusts. We're not talking about real scorpions, right? We're talking about symbolism here, okay? They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. So we're talking about people in battle dress, or people in a battle, or So I think if we let the Bible interpret itself, we see that this is symbolic prophecy. If you notice what it says in Jeremiah chapter 51, let's look at verse 14.
The Lord Almighty hath sworn by himself, I will surely fill you with men, as with a swarm of locusts, and they will shout and triumph over you.
So, I mean, it's an Old Testament figure of speech to associate locust with an army that devours. Because what does an army of locusts do?
Devours.
Right? They devour every living thing there. So, I think we have that example. If you look in Exodus chapter 10, look how the locusts were used back in the time of Moses. Against Egypt, right? So Exodus chapter 10, we have verses 1 to 20 is the story there. And it says, I think we can start there in verse 4. Moses is trying to get Pharaoh to let God's people go worship him, right? And verse 4 says, or else if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. And of course, they refused. And so much of the crops were destroyed by the locusts that notice Pharaoh's servants in verse 7, what they said to him. I think this is pretty interesting what they say to him in verse 7 of Exodus chapter 10. Who's got that?
Pharaoh's officials said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?
Yeah, can you imagine if all the crops had been eaten up by these locusts? The people of Egypt just couldn't go to Mike Austin's house and say, hey, let us eat some of your produce, right? Now, maybe we can do that, but they didn't have this option. And so, I mean, the locust just devours everything, and I think that's a good description of an army that goes into an area and devours everything, right?
But these locusts were told not to touch the grass, but to go after man. They said, and they
Well-
sting like a scorpion. They're saying it's the Arabs that overran, and they usually don't. They protect the earth. They go after the people. And this
Right, right. In this particular case, notice who they were supposed to kill in verse 4. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, because in this particular case, the armies there, right, the Arabs, they wanted to be able to conquer the area, but have it livable, right? And so, in this particular case, when you talk about devouring everything, they were conquering areas, working their way up toward Europe. And if you can notice here, it says, only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So in this particular case, we have the Arab armies. They were actually commanded and told, and we do have a copy of the command that was given by this particular leader of the caliphate. His name was Abu Bakr, and he gave an order not to kill anybody that was godly. That was part of his order. It's almost like his order went right along with Revelation chapter 9, verse 4, which I thought was interesting. You know, that when you look at the wording he used there, compare it with that scripture, it's very similar, it's very close, you know. We don't want to destroy the plants, and we want to only attack the people who are not of God, right?
Except it says, but it was given that they should not kill them, but only torment them for 5 months.
See
And
that?
if the Arabs are killing people, then obviously, you know, this is saying that they're not going to kill them.
They said the significance of the scorpions is that their bite is painful, but it's usually not fatal.
Yeah, right. And I think in this particular case, they're conquering areas of people who weren't part of their religious belief, right? And so I think, you know, this particular caliphate that took place was really by Abu Bakr, was really when the Arabs were conquering areas, but it wasn't necessarily for religious purposes at this point in time that they were doing this. Now, these Arabs did convert and become Muslims, and then ultimately you have the different religious wars that took place.
Evidently, it also said that if they were willing to pay tribute, that they went to France.
Yeah.
What the tribute represented, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, typically a caliphate was something that was of a religious nature, but I think what they were trying to do is increase their territory and their influence and their power as this group of people. So, Scott?
So, two questions. Who were the godly ones from their perspective, and how did they know?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't know for sure, but I think what they were looking for is these weren't, they were monotheistic, you know, and they were, and I can only imagine that according to his order that they would inquire about people who, you know, if they're monotheistic or not. Right, and if they were monotheistic, then they weren't going to hurt them in any way. But if they were of any other type of religion that wasn't monotheistic, then I think you had that type of situation you're talking about. Is they want to exact some kind of tribute from them, right?
Tribute or join.
Yeah,
them.
that's true.
That was the truth.
Yeah, they would have to. Yeah, a lot of people were forcibly joined, right? Made to join. The Muslim faith, yeah, brother.
So were they just asking him? Because I feel like
Well,
if you
I don't
took
know
a
for sure exactly how they were inquiring about this, right? When you go into an area, I'm assuming they had some information and knowledge about that area before they went into it and conquered it. So I don't really know, you know, how they. I think we'd have to do some research to find out. Bill, what do you think? Yeah, I'm not sure either. It's just interesting to me that this particular order was given not to hurt or kill people who were godly, right? So I think you could do some research on it, maybe Thomas, and let us know.
One thing I read, it said Christian or Jews, not to kill them. But then it said something about those that shave their heads, and they were to kill them. shaving the heads, they didn't.
Yeah,
say
I'm not
that.
sure what that means either,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe some type of religious, Buddhists tend to do that, maybe they had some of that area and they were,
It seems like Luther had a funny haircut, I mean, his is.
yeah, I can't remember what that haircut is called, right? But they had the hair on the side, but not on
Yeah,
the
it was like
top.
they shaved their head
Yeah.
and just left the top that
Right,
way.
right. So, they were conquering areas, and I think, part of this was under this religious guise, but part of it really was, I believe, trying to increase their area sphere of influence and gain wealth, right?
Pastor, it said the
Because you can't
horses,
gain wealth from dead people.
it said the horses referred to the fact that the Arabian military rode horses,
Yeah,
so it connected them.
and they were expert horsemen, right? Yeah. I think as we go on and look at some of the time prophecies given with the fifth trumpet, it lines right up with what the Arabs, the Muslims were doing at this point in time.
What time of the earth was that you talking about?
Well, probably we're talking about I think starting in the 7th century, right? The 7th century is the 600s. That's where Muhammad supposedly had this interaction with God and started promoting his religion, right? And gaining followers. And then ultimately putting together armies that went out to conquer. But I think this started, at the time of Muhammad in the 7th century, which is the 600s. So we have this idea of them battling against the Eastern Roman Empire. Because remember, the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, Constantine went over to what was referred to as Istanbul today, but he named the city Constantinople after himself, Constantine, right? And he did that, in the 4th century. And so you had the Roman Empire that they were fighting against the Roman Empire starting there in the 7th century. So,
You had provided a timeline for like the different seals.
yeah.
You gonna do something similar with the trumpets or not as?
Well, I think we can do it to some extent. I think it's more difficult to do. I mean, I believe we're covering the same type of time periods, right? The churches, the seals, and the trumpets kind of overlap the time periods. And we try, especially with the churches, we say, well, about this date to this date, and about this date to this date, right? And so I think there's a lot of overlap. I don't think we can really nail down and say this date, this date to this date for sure. I think it's a general. You have historical things that are taking place. We know from history about the attacks of the Muslims and their armies against the Eastern Roman Empire, starting in the 7th century and all the way up to the 15th century. Finally conquering Constantinople in 1453. So I think this is the time period we're talking about, right, in this particular trumpet. I thought it was interesting that if you look in Judges chapter 6, verse 5, so let's try to link these locusts to these Arabs, these Muslims that we're talking about, okay? Let's try to make it more concrete, right?
For they would come up with their livestock in their tents, coming in as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land and destroy it.
What was that reference again?
Judges 6, verse, did you do 5?
5.
Look at 7, verse 12.
And the Midianites and Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, and as the sand of the sea side from the multitude.
So they're called children of the east. And what is east of Egypt? Right? This is the area that we're talking about. This is where Muhammad, so-called, got his vision and started the religion we know as Islam today. It was just east of Egypt. And so, you can see how it's referring to this people group, which we know as we call them Arabs today because, you know, nomadic type people, right? Is what we're talking about. Or Saracens is another term that you might see in history, right? The Saracens. And I think it's interesting how, where do the locusts come from? What direction?
From the east.
From the east, right? You know, and it says it calls these people, people of the east. And I think it's interesting how we're trying to connect that type of religion and people group with what's taking place here in Revelation chapter 9. And I think using this idea of locusts, which comes from the east, and these people were called people of the east, we're just trying to connect this people group with the Arabs and the Muslims, is what we're saying.
It says
Does that make sense?
the locusts aren't hostile toward men, but the scorpions are. So they took the idea of the locust overrunning it and combined it with the scorpions that they're going to find.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I definitely want to get to the scorpions there. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 9. So what was the smoke? What did we say the smoke was? We covered that last time?
The Dark Ages.
Darkness.
Yeah. So smoke is a deception that is covering the eyes, the spiritual insight of people so that they're darkened to who God really is, right? So the teachings of Islam is, or the teachings of the Catholic Church, or the teachings of any religion that's not in harmony with the Bible is considered causing darkness or smoke, right? Obliterating the idea of being able to see properly. So they can't see spiritually, right? Because they're being taught things about God that aren't true. And used as an army. Anybody go out and try to find chick publications and see what they were saying about this time period? You know how we talked about chick publications last time? Yeah. Okay. All right. You know, the trumpets are probably the hardest part for me in the book of Revelation because it's a lot of symbolism you got to connect with the Old Testament to try to understand what it's saying here. But with this idea of how the churches and the seals and the trumpets parallel each other, I think we can figure things out, right? That we're talking about this type of time period. And if you notice, notice verse 13 of Revelation chapter 9.
Sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the horns of the golden altar that is before God.
Okay, you see the golden altar? You see the sixth trumpet that is associated with the golden altar?
And the horns.
What part of the sanctuary was the golden altar actually physically located?
The golden ones.
What is it?
From the most holy place.
Okay. So just in case we understand what we're talking about here, if this is the courtyard and we got the tabernacle, right? And this is the veil between most holy place and we'll call this the holy place, right? You got the table of showbread, you had the lampstand, right? You enter in from the east, and this is the Ark of the Covenant, the most holy place. Right here before the veil is the golden altar of incense, right? So it's located here, and we have this reference in this is the sixth trumpet, right? Mentions this article in heavenly sanctuary. So that tells us the timing, right? When did Jesus' ministry in the holy place in the heavenly sanctuary end?
31.
Right, in 1844. So in 1844, he goes into the most holy place, right? So when we see the sixth trumpet brings up this article here, well, we know we haven't reached 1844 yet. You see that? So isn't it interesting how we use the sanctuary to help us understand the timing? Right, Thomas?
So does that mean that the fifth trumpet also happened before 1844?
That's exactly right.
Because
Right.
it seems like it's describing modern warfare here.
It does, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
like
there's,
imagine John
the
seeing-
ideology of this time period is still present today, right? But it's describing what the Muslims did during this time period against the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, God is really using the Muslim army to punish the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, it's a judgment against the Eastern Roman Empire, okay? That's the fifth trumpet, is against the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, we talked about the first four trumpets, we said was punishment against the Jews in Jerusalem. And then we go through, we talked about how it was against the Western Roman Empire. And then you have the development of the Catholic Church beginning. Then we jumped over and looked at the Eastern Roman Empire, starting with the fifth trumpet. And so, remember the Eastern Roman Empire, when did the Western Roman Empire end? What year? West Roman Empire. When did they end? What year?
504.
1780, 1789?
476 AD, right?
Close enough.
That was the last emperor in Rome. Remember, then we went through in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, we talked about how the Eastern Roman emperor sent his army over to push out the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Heruli, remember? And then establish the Pope, the Bishop of Rome as the Pope. He could sit on the throne in Rome, right? And so this was the last year of the actual Western Roman Emperor. Okay, wasn't his name Romulus? Wasn't his name Romulus? I'm trying to remember his name. Somebody could look it up. Somebody Googling that right now? We don't have Tim Gray here, do we? Do we have somebody else that's a Googler? Anybody Googling? The last Western Roman Emperor, what was his name? He was deposed in 476 AD. He wasn't that old. I'm trying to think if his name was Romulus. It is Romulus. Okay, got it. So we have Romulus here. He's deposed. And so that's the last date of the Western Roman Empire, right?
475 to 476.
Okay, good. So he checked me with the internet, so I think we're pretty close. Thank you, brother.
Everything you read on the internet's right?
Everything.
So how about the Eastern Roman Empire? When did it end?
1453?
That's it. 1453. That's when it ended. And how did it end? What happened in 1453?
The fall of Constantinople.
The fall of Constantinople. The Muslims built a massive cannon, Mike. I mean, massive. To pound against the wall of Constantinople. So they couldn't get through the wall, right? Yeah. Somebody Google the cannon that they had built to.
A cannon?
Cannon.
I heard about the cannon, and it could throw a cannonball of 1,500 pounds.
Yeah, it was a huge, massive gun that the Muslims used to conquer the city of Constantinople. At this point in time, the Eastern Roman Empire had shrunk way down. They weren't very powerful, but they still had a city that was supposed to be unconquerable, right? How many times have we heard that? Same thing about Babylon, right?
Esther,
Dardanelles.
why did
The Dardanelles.
Constantine move from Rome to Constantinople to start that?
Well, as you can imagine, if we had a map, let me pull the map down here. Okay. He was a powerful Roman emperor, right? I mean, they had control. I mean, let's see. If I can draw this over here. I'm drawing the peninsula. We got Spain, and then, we come over and we'll do the boot here of Italy, and then we have Greece here, and then as you go along, and Africa's down here, right? So this is Europe. and this is Africa. Okay, this is Rome right there. So if you're the emperor, and his empire covered all this area, right? Right, this is Middle East over here, Middle East. So if you're wanting and you're, right here is your capital city, okay? So what he did was he moved it to here. Isn't that a little more centrally located in his empire?
That's Constantinople.
That's Constantinople, right. So above Turkey, this is Turkey, right? So actually it kind of looks like this, and you got the Black Sea here, and you got the Aegean Sea. This is the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean, you know, and you have the Isthmus, you know, the little piece of land that kind of connects Europe and Asia right there.
So he moved there. It's more central to his, to reign over that. And he left the Catholic Pope in charge of that.
Right. He let the
As a
Catholic,
sub,
the
as
Bishop
under him.
of Rome, the Bishop. Remember, he wouldn't call the Pope then. It's
Right.
just the Bishop of Rome.
but he considered him to be under his
Right.
authority.
Right.
And then he took over.
It wasn't until the 6th century when Clovis, the French king, you know, before Clovis, the kings and emperors were over the Catholic Church, right? There was no question about that. But what happened, why Clovis is so important when it comes to prophecy, and this is what is talked about in Daniel chapter 12, Clovis turns it around and he makes himself subject to the Bishop of Rome. You know, that's when you start seeing the Bishop of Rome becoming the Pope and having power and authority over the kings of Europe with Clovis. Y'all remember that?
Well, when Luther
When we
went,
did Daniel chapter 12? You know, the 1335 and the 1290? Right? In Daniel chapter 12?
well, when Luther went in front of the Catholic Church, there was the emperor was there. He was in a position of power at that time, right, over the church.
Yeah, so later with Charlemagne, and I'll mention him in the sermon today. In 800, Charlemagne was crowned by who? The Pope. In what year? 800. 800, that's exactly right. So then you have the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, right? With Charlemagne being crowned by the Pope. The Pope was saying, yeah, you're the emperor, but I'm over you. I'm the one crowning you, right? I mean, that's what was taking place there. And so, with the Holy Roman Empire, then down through the years, of course, when you get down to Martin Luther's time, it was Charles V, if I remember right. That was the emperor. And essentially you had these princes that were called electors that elected the emperor at that time, and Charles V was elected as the emperor of this empire that was left over from Charlemagne's empire. But do you have, somebody check me, is it Charles V that was the emperor during the time of Martin Luther?
Yeah, he was there at the Diet of Worms.
Yep. The Diet of Worms, right?
And
Yep.
he was trying to protect Luther, but he didn't have total power to do that.
Well, I don't think he was trying to protect him. I think he was actually a dedicated Catholic. And because the electors, the princes who elected the emperor, right, they were protecting Martin Luther. And they're the ones that put pressure on him not to kill Martin Luther. And the Catholic Church was putting pressure on him to kill Martin Luther. And that's when he said, you know, essentially, open season. He wasn't going to be, you know, responsible himself for the death of Martin Luther, but he said, you know, if you want to go kill him, go kill him, right? Did y'all check me? Is it Charles V?
Yeah, Charles.
Okay. Okay, so that gives you some idea why he relocated his capital there to Constantinople. It was Byzantium, right? That's why they call it the Byzantine Empire. The historians call it the Byzantine Empire.
Ottoman.
But they didn't call it the Byzantine Empire, right? So he relocated to Byzantium and changed it to Constantinople, which is what in today's Istanbul, right? Okay, so we have a little history there. Let's see if we can put the two together. Notice it says in verse 5, they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. So what is 5 months in turn? I mean, if this is day for year, right? What does 5 months equal?
150 days.
So-
150 years? We figure 30.
So 150 days, because we're using the 30 days per, for the Jewish mindset, 30 days per month, right? So 5 times 30 is 150. In reality, it equals what?
Years.
All right, so we have a 150-year period that verse 5 is talked about. So I've tried to use the Bible to relate what's happening in the fifth trumpet to the Muslims attacking the Byzantine Empire, okay? By calling them locusts and going in the Bible and seeing that the locusts referred to these people that eventually, the Midianites and these people that eventually became the Arabs and adopted Muhammad's religion of Islam, right? And then they had the Caliphate with Abu Bakr and others after him attacking the Byzantine Empire. So remember, if you remember my map here, there was Constantinople, right? And they're down here, Saudi Arabia, and they're attacking from the south, is what they're doing, coming up toward Europe. Eventually, it's called the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire was a pretty large empire that covered a pretty good part of, they even covered part of southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and even part of Africa there. So it was called the Ottoman Empire. They were pretty powerful at one point in time.
All the way
Well-
to Vienna.
All the way to Vienna. That's exactly right. Yeah, Austria. Okay, so 150 years. So if you remember, we're looking at a 150-year period that's associated with the Muslims, and God was using them to punish the Eastern Roman Empire. That's what we got to keep in mind. That's what the fifth trumpet's about. So the Battle of Bathus, which took place in 1299. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. July the 27th of 1299. Baphius. Okay, the Battle of Baphius. Right? So it's 1299, we have this particular day. What's interesting about this is July the 27th. So when we add 150 years to this particular battle, we get the year 1449. And on July the 27th, you notice it's the same date, exactly 150 years later, this is where the Byzantine Empire lost so much of their power that the Sultan, his name was Murad II, okay? This is the Sultan at that time. In this year, gave permission for the last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire to be crowned. His name was Constantine the 11th. He had another name next to it, which I have a hard time actually pronouncing. So if anybody wants to look at it and try to pronounce it, feel free. Because I haven't been successful in doing it properly. Right? Colby, what do you think? You know the name I'm talking about? It's Constantine the 11th? No. Yeah. Look it up, see if you can pronounce his name. I don't know. It's a really weird name. It's got ology on the end of it, so maybe you can throw some.
Paleologus?
Yeah, that's yeah. What do you think, Colby? You got a handle on that one? It's a weird name, isn't it? I don't know how to say it, right? It's a weird name. So, but to say it's Constantine the 11th, he's the one that was crowned or coronated that day. He actually wasn't allowed to be crowned. So I misspoke when I said crowned, but he was coronated, right? We typically associate crowning with coronation, but they had some type of a service there saying that he could be the emperor, but you notice how drastically they lost their power, and they were really under the influence and power of the Sultan who was Murad II.
Last Christian ruler of Constantinople.
The last Christian ruler, and it's Constantine the 11th.
And isn't Murad the dad of Mehmet?
Yep, that's exactly right. So he dies in 1450, right? And so he seemed to be a little, I mean, I think he was a brutal person, but he seemed to not have the drive and the desire to spend a lot of money on a war against Constantinople, right? The last holdout against the Muslims. But his son did. Mahmed II. In 1450, he took over. He had this big, huge cannon made and prepared for battle against Constantinople. He wanted to take the city. So Mahmed II is the one who actually conquered Constantinople in the year 1453.
Did you get that from China?
No, I don't. Do you remember where he had it made? I can't remember. I thought it was Europe. He said somebody in Europe made it.
I didn't hear
It was a famous.
Basilic is the cannon.
Basilic was the cannon.
Okay, so
Designed
where?
by Orban, a cannon engineer. Saruka Usta, and architect Muslahidin Usta.
Where was it? Where was it built? Was it built there in Turkey? Is that what? I'm imagining they built it in Turkey, right?
It's 27 feet long.
27 feet long is this cannon.
16.8 tons.
Took 60 oxen and 400 men to drag it.
60 oxen.
But here's
Where
the
are we
thing,
getting the
so
1299 from? Everything I
at
see says it was
Constantinople
1302.
was 16
This
feet thick.
Yeah.
How thick was it?
The walls was 16 feet thick, Constantinople. It was.
That was
I guess
massive.
you need a big old cannon to do that. then.
It's huge. It's huge. You know what's interesting about this? In the Civil War, the South didn't have the type of industry the North had, right? And whenever they had to build their own cannons and use their own cannons against the North, one of the things that the Northerners would do is if the Southerners were coming in and being successful in conquering a territory, they wanted to make sure that no piano wire was left.
Oh.
Right? Because they would take that piano wire and wrap these cannons with that piano wire and strengthen the cannons so they could shoot a little further. Yeah. That was one of the big things in battle is take the hill where the cannons are and then turn the cannons around on against their their own army. So
It was made in Edirnes.
where?
Edirnes?
Is that in Turkey?
It's at the north of Turkey.
It's north of Turkey. Okay. All right. So good. So the Battle of Baphius. Is that what you looked up? And you got 1302?
Yeah, every website I see says 1302.
Oh. So I've got 27th of 1299 as kind of the beginning point of the Battle of Baphius. Do they mention anything about, is that the ending point, or is that the...
It just says it occurred on July 27, 1302.
Really? Okay. So we got 1302 up here. And so if we add 150 to that, we get still 1452, right? And I think, and then you have Mahmed actually conquering Constantinople in 1453. So do your homework on this. It sounds like I may be mistaken about 1299 because it sounds like every website he's looked up says the Battle of Baphius was 1302. But what's interesting about this is this 150-year time period is what we're talking about. I mean, the Bible didn't say, oh, you got to start with the Battle of Baphius and you got 150 and you get to the coronation of the last Christian king. It just gives us a time period of when that's associated with the Muslims conquering Constantinople. As you can see, this time period is really pretty neat. What you got, Bill?
Just wondering what you thought about the time period 674 to 823. That's actually what I had written in my Bible.
Really?
How the Bible became king of Wassas, began this campaign of expansion, conquering, and going out. In
I haven't looked at it that way. What's it, so essentially you're applying the 150, what I think's interesting about the 150,
Or Revelation College.
it brings us down. Yeah? Well, it's a possibility, right? What I'm looking for is what gets us to this date, right? Because that's the date that Constantinople fell. And so we have kind of the development of the Ottoman Empire. And I think we see the next time period that's given to us here. So we have the 5 months. What's the next time period that's mentioned here and associated with the fifth trumpet? It's actually in the sixth trumpet. What's the, notice of verse 15. What is the time period there?
An hour and a day, a month and a year.
Okay. So let's look at that. Okay, hour, day, month, year. So if we were to take and turn all that into day, and then use day for year principle, what time period do you get?
360 plus 30 plus 1 plus 124.
390.
Check me on that, see if that's right.
I think it's 396, is it? It's 365 plus 30 days.
Well, remember 360 for the Jewish records.
Yeah,
We're doing 30 days in a month.
Yeah, 360 plus 390 plus 1, 391 plus the hour.
Yeah. Okay, so does the 15 days work out okay with 1 hour?
124.
Okay. So what I have with that, and I'm using Josiah Litch now. If you look in the Daniel and Revelation book, where Josiah Litch is calculating this time period of 391 years and 15 days, he comes up with August the 11th, 1840. And so August the 11th, 1840, what happened at this point in time, the Ottoman Empire has shrunk and doesn't have near the power it had, a few hundred years before. And at this point in time, the Ottoman Empire, there's a, what do you want to call it, a treaty in London where they agree to be able to take some of the property, some of the empire, the old Ottoman Empire, and give it to Egypt. And essentially stripping away the Ottoman Empire from the power of its glory days. So we say this is kind of the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire right here. I really think it actually physically completely ended in World War I. But this is a date that's given, I would put it as kind of the beginning of the end. And look at Josiah Litz's calculation. And he started on January the 6th, 1449, with Murad II. You notice here, in July the 27th of 1449, when the last Christian emperor of Constantinople had his coronation, who was in power really of this area? It was Murad II, and came into this type of power in January the 6th of 1449. So what Josiah Litz did is he took January the 6th 1449, and he added that time period to it, and that's how we got August the 11th. What's interesting about that is that's when the Treaty of London was implemented, essentially stripping away the power of the Ottoman Empire at that point in time. You know, the fifth trumpet it's a difficult thing. You have all these different symbols that we try to use the Old Testament to help us understand. We know that the sixth trumpet is still before 1844. So we know that the events that take place in the fifth trumpet have to be before 1844. So we're looking at events that deal with the Eastern Roman Empire and the people who had conquered the Eastern Roman Empire and what happened to them. And I think, so that's how we're trying to apply this and approach the fifth trumpet. So, you know, the Bible doesn't give us these type of dates and specific details that we're looking up here. What we're looking at is the general principles that we're seeing in the fifth trumpet and saying, how does that apply? What can we see in history that we could apply that to? And so this is an attempt to do that. But I think the fifth trumpet is difficult. Any comments?
Could you just review how you get the hour again? I get the day, the month, the year piece, but how do you come up with 15 days for the hour?
1/24 of 1460.
1/24.
There's 12 months, so
Okay.
12 months happens, that would be half of the month, which would be 15 days, since it's 24. There's 24 hours in a day.
Right. That's a good way to look at it, then. And you're assuming 30 days in a month, Lori. That's the thing we got to
360
Right,
days.
yeah.
Yeah. 360, right? So you know what the Jews did, right? Because since they would be off, some of their years had 13 months. So it really makes it confusing when you look at how they did their time calculations. Okay. All right, so in an effort to apply the fifth and sixth trumpets to what's happening in the Muslim world, this is what we're doing in Revelation chapter 9. And if you notice, from the time of, essentially the Ottomans, they converted to Islam and were used by this ideology. And who's behind the ideology? I mean, what does it say? Who's behind all this?
Satan.
Yeah, because it says
What verse are you on?
in verse 11. What's it say in verse 11?
And they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon.
So what does Abaddon mean in Hebrew? I mean, you should have a note in your Bibles, right? What does it mean?
Destruction.
Yeah, destruction, destroyer. And what does Apollyon mean in the Greek? Essentially the same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, destroyer. Destruction and destroyer. So I think we can see that we've already talked about who the star is that's associated in the beginning of Revelation chapter 9, who has the star fallen from heaven. So we start this chapter off saying that this is something that Satan is behind, right? He's the instigator of all this. He's the one that's putting this together. He's the one, and God is allowing it. You know, it's interesting to me that even though you can be enemies of God's people, He's using these people, like He has in the Old Testament, in order to punish certain people groups, right? I mean, the Eastern Roman Empire, they professed to be Christian. But were they acting like Christians? No. God was using the Muslims, right, to punish them.
Is that Muhammad?
Right.
Talking about verse 1.
Well, I mean, I think it's talking about Satan. You know, who is the one who's behind Muhammad? Who's the one who's behind the religion? I think that's what it's talking about here. But I mean, some people bring up how it was the first king of the Ottoman Empire. You know, they refer this verse to the first king of the Ottoman Empire. But ultimately, who's the one who's behind all of this destruction, right? And I think it's talking about Satan. What's scary about this is, and I wish, you know, you have to be in a sensitive way to be able to share something like this. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to the Muslims and say, well, you know, your king is the devil.
You might not like that.
Yeah. It's not a good way to start a conversation.
It'll be the end of the conversation.
But I think what we have here is this is what the Bible is telling us, that ideology, that philosophy, that religion doesn't come from God. He actually is something that a fallen angel has come up with, and through the prophet Muhammad has created this religion that we know as Islam today. Yeah, that's pretty scary to say this is your king. But let's look at the evidence of that. Raymond?
But I think
Oh, we're running out of time, aren't we?
when you're talking about smoke and fog, whatever, I mean, your obscurity, that can affect any religion,
Yeah,
right?
right,
And like when you were talking about locusts.
right.
That, it's much easier to ask someone to bow the knee or die. Because at the end, you're getting the same result, and that's ultimately what we're getting with written in the hand or the forehead, right? And I mean, that's a principle that Satan's abused.
Yeah,
For
it's the same
the
principle.
Inquisition, same deal. Like because you're not reading 27 fundamentals and then saying, "Are you good with this?" No, you bow the knee or you're dead. It's so much
Yeah.
easier to roll through a countryside. Just you're with us or you're dead.
Right, right. You know, and it's interesting how Christians approach to evangelism, because that's the Muslim approach, right? You know,
You're going to hell.
Yeah, either you're with us or you're an infidel, we're going to kill you, right? But the Christian approach is, let me tell you about God's love. It's life-changing, right? But the Catholics, you know, you also have this with the armies of Europe, right? Conquering and fighting against the Muslims and these different crusades that took place, really promoted by the Catholic Church, because they wanted to be able to have control over Jerusalem.
Use fear to get people to come on to your
Yeah, they
When
used
we toured in Mexico where they did the Inquisitions there, and it's intense.
It was for
Yeah.
indoctrination.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. See, it's all, in my opinion, it's all part of the same philosophy, right?
It's taking away choice.
You just take away choice. So
That's what
when you,
Jesus gave us, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You just want to be our friend and our brother, not someone that.
Scott?
So we began the trumpets by saying that these are the judgments of God on God's enemies,
On the enemies of God's people.
on the enemies of God's people. So, how does that apply to Satan's activity in controlling, you know, the Arab nation against Eastern Rome? How does that
Okay.
fit under that?
Just like, remember how God called, what did he call Cyrus? Was Cyrus a godly man who was converted and connected to God? No.
His servant.
His servant, right? You see, it's the same principle. That's Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. And so I think we have the same thing here, is, you mean, the devil had different motives than what God had, but he's allowing this to take place, and he's actually using, he's got a unique way of doing that, of using this situation for the betterment of God's people, right? And I think he's doing this here. He's allowing Satan came up with this idea, this ideology, this religion, and it's one that devastates and conquers, right? And so he's utilizing that to punish the Eastern Roman Empire. But if you look at the sins of the Eastern Roman Empire, you know, it was horrible too. I mean, the Spanish Inquisition, we have, of course, that was way in the western part of Europe, but who had power during this period of time? Yeah, the Catholic Church. And who gave the Catholic Church power? The Roman Empire, right? And so we have this, and then ultimately other kings, the Holy Roman Empire, you know, which is what what Europe was known as, a large part of Europe during the Middle Ages. So I think what's happening here is God's allowing them, you know, even though this isn't a group of godly people for sure, but God is using them to punish the people who've been persecuting Bible-believing Christians, the Waldenses, the Albigenses, you know, these people groups who were in Europe trying to spread the gospel, and yet they were being persecuted by so-called Christians, right? See, that's why when you hear people bring up, well, look what the Christians did in the Crusades. I'm going to say that's Catholicism, not Christianity.
There you go.
Right? There's a difference between the two. And so Christians don't believe in going out and forcing somebody to be converted. Right? We want to share God's love and allow that to penetrate a person's heart and change them. God is the one who does the conversion. We can't convert anybody. Right? I mean, if we could convert people, we'd convert ourselves first, wouldn't we? Well, we don't even have the power to do that. God does that in us, right? And so, I think that's what we're seeing here in the fifth trumpet. What tells me that the fifth trumpet and these trumpets have happened in the past is the relationship to the sanctuary, right? When I see in Revelation chapter 8, verse 3, how we have this angel, and we talked about this angel really representing Christ, in the holy place in the heavenly sanctuary, we know it's not 1844 yet. And that's when the trumpets start, right? And then we see the sixth trumpet is still talking about the furniture in the holy place, so we know it's not 1844 yet, because we know from Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, that that's when the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary takes place. That's when he moves his ministry from the holy place to the most holy place. So that's what I'm looking at, is you see clearly the trumpets 1 through 6 are in the past. But the seventh trumpet, we'll talk about that in Revelation chapter 10, is in the future. Right? What does the seventh trumpet do? What do we call that event that takes place?
Second coming.
No?
Oh.
Before then.
Oh, before that.
Close of probation.
Right.
Right. And so, we're somewhere in there, aren't we? We're after the sixth trumpet, and let's think about this too. I don't think it's necessarily this beginning and an end, and now this one begins and this one ends. Can there be overlap with these trumpets? Right? Yeah, I think so too. We're not talking about something that is exact, right? We're talking about general history that would take place from the time of Christ, when he ascended to heaven in 31 AD, down to 1844. And so that's what we're trying to apply. We're trying to look at history and say, how does this fit, right? So I think having the first trumpet mentioned, the altar of incense, having the sixth trumpet mentioned, the altar of incense, it tells us we're in history, right? But the seventh trumpet is definitely after that. Colby.
I was reading Hebrews 9 the other day.
Oh, I love that. It's a great
Yeah.
chapter.
It specifically says the altar of incense was in the most holy place.
Yeah.
What?
That's the way they translated it, right?
Okay.
Yeah. To make you think that it was physically sitting there. The way it's really meant is, and you can go to the Old Testament and see for sure, right?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I know.
Yeah.
I've read Exodus 40, like the placement and everything. So
But what was the purpose of the altar of incense? Was for the most holy place, right? I mean, the incense went up over the curtain, right? And they were supposed to have this incense there to actually cover the Ark of the Covenant before the high priest ever went in there on the Day of Atonement. So I think that's what he's associating it with, even though they've translated it as if it's in the most holy place. I tell you what, I wish we could go into it, because these translations misuse some of the Greek words there. And that's what I wanted to be able to show, but we're way out of time. Father in heaven, it's a difficult thing we're trying to study here in the book of Revelation. And we just ask that you guide us and help us understand. Father, we thank you for caring for us, for writing, having this book written for us, so we can have it here at the end of time. But we see how you're working down through history, and you're going to bring it all to a close soon. Help us be ready. Help us help others be ready. In Jesus' name. Amen.